Welcome, members. My apologies, just starting. So I was just having a list with the council on a separate legal matter. So thank you everyone for attending, and officers as well. Welcome Ed, welcome Lydia, and welcome to the Audit and Standards Committee meeting in Melton Borough Council. Members are reminded that we will be using the video or audio visual system this evening, and the meeting will be recorded. Members are asked to physically raise their hands in the usual way to indicate they wish to speak and to use their microphones when speaking. For the benefit of all present, the microphone is live when the red light displays. Please switch mobile phones to silent. Try self. And I will now provide a reminder of the evacuation procedure. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by one of the 6 emergency exits around the sides of the chamber. Please assemble in the far side of the front car park nearest the park entrance. Officers will be on hand to assist persons who require any assistance. There are no members of the public, but for information, there is legislation that allows the public to film, record, or use social media at a council meeting. This must not disrupt the good order of the meeting, nor include any filming of the public seating area. I am Councillor Lee Higgins, and I will chair the meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee, and I will confirm that we have the following Melton Borough Council officers in attendance tonight. The Chief Executive, Ed de Coverley, Dawn Garton to my right, who is the Director of Corporate Services, Lydia Roosling, Director of Place and Prosperity, Clive Tobin, who is to my left, the Assistant Director of Governance and Democracy, Rachel Ashley-Cornt, the Chief Internal Auditor, and Adam Green, Senior Democratic Services and Scrutiny Officer. Just for information for all members, I have said to Rachel that she can leave by 7:15 because she has got a meeting in Rutland, and so I will be running a strict time agenda to that moment in time. If there is anything that needs deferring or waiting on that, then we will do that. But I don't want Rachel to be late on that leaving here. Apologies for absence. We have received apologies for Councillor Freer. Councillor Holmes is present and a substitute for Councillor Freer, but she is not here. So at the moment, we will just mark her as late at the moment. Usually Elaine will turn up, depends sometimes with commitments. I think Elaine was unwell yesterday. Yes, okay, yeah, that's fine. So if thank you. So if Elaine doesn't turn up, we'll just put an apology in her absence. But as I say, Elaine's usually very good at that, to attend. Minutes, to confirm the minutes of the 29th of July. And can I request that members accept the minutes? Do I have a proposer? Councillor Mason and Councillor Brown. All those in favour? That's majority. Any abstentions? That's 1. Any against? Tim, were you in favour? Yeah, it's okay. That's fine. No, that's fine. Yeah. So that is carried. So I will sign that paperwork off. Just remind me to do that later. I'm going to move on. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest for the meeting? No? Okay, so we will go for, can I just confirm that the order is in the right order as agreed for Rachel on this paper? I'm not juggling them all about.
Sorry, Chair, we were going to swap the item 6 car parking before the risk management. So that looks like the order paper is correct. Yeah.
What I thought. Okay. So item 4, Rachel, over to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. So the first report this evening is the internal audit update report. So this gives you an update on the latest delivery of this year's internal audit plan. So a full copy of the plan is provided for you in page 19 of your pack this evening. with all of the audits for the year and the status of each of those at the time of producing this report, and the outcome of any of those which have been finalised. So the report is in the usual format that the committee will be familiar with. So in section 2.5 is a summary of all of the audit reports which have been finalised since the last meeting. So this is on page 16 to page 17 of the pack. So the one report that we have summarised this evening is in relation to the operating agreement for the Business Improvement District, so we refer to as the BID. So the council has an arrangement in place for undertaking the collection and enforcement for BID levy monies on behalf of the BID company. So as part of this audit, we want to get assurance over how the council complies with the operating agreement in practice in terms of the income collection and any enforcement activity that's required. So we have given a good level of assurance for the control environment on the basis that a reporting process is in place and that complies with the requirements of the agreement. And we could also see from sample testing that there are processes in place that apply the expected controls around the recovery of those monies in practice as well. So we've also given a good level of assurance for compliance on this audit as well on the basis of sample testing, which looked at demand notices, reminder letters and summonses, which had all been issued in accordance with the agreed recovery schedule. So we did identify a couple of small errors in the reported data and also an opportunity to further record the rationale for any decision to not pursue further action on particular cases. But as I say, overall, we've given a good level of assurance across the audit and a low organisational impact overall. So we will continue to report back to the committee on the implementation of the remaining audits within the plan, as those are finalised, with a number of those nearing completion at the point of reporting. And we remain on track at this stage to deliver your internal audit plan. So also within the report on page 23 of the papers is an update on the implementation of audit recommendations. So where we've agreed an action with management as a result of an audit. We have had 11 of those have been reported as completed during the period since your last update. We currently have 18 actions which are overdue. So that is an improved position from the last progress report where there were 23 actions overdue. So we are in a good direction of travel. There do, however, remain 2 that fall into the category of high priority and over 3 months overdue. And those are summarised for you in Appendix B to the paper, which, as members will know, is an exempt session. So should we wish to go into details on that, obviously we need to go into private session. Also within the report in Appendix 3 is the customer satisfaction feedback. So members may note that this is slightly different to the version that was in the 2045 updates. We have aligned our performance and internal factors around in line with the council's internal audit strategy and also the new global internal audit standards. So the questions now reflect those key elements as well. And we've had 1 response to date, which is reflected within those tables as well. So that's a quick run through of the key sections of the report, Chair, and I'm happy to take questions on any of the detail. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Happy to open this up for debate. Any members? Councillor Atherton?
So I've got kind of 4 things that spring to mind when read the report. Thank you for the report, Rachel. Given the time constraints, I'm quite happy to read out the points now, but then to type them up and post them to Rachel for a response post the meeting, if that helps. The question number 1 is how do we best reduce the management actions that are overdue, particularly those actions that have been overdue for more than 3 months and are high priority? Are we able to identify any root cause of delayed management actions? In terms of the bid operations agreement, who, if not this committee, in the council should agree that whether the current monitor arrangements are okay, etc. And reading the report, I have no reason to believe they're not, albeit they're not compliant with the agreement between the 2 organisations. What action is being or has been taken to improve enforcement case reporting by the council to bid? And given all of that, are we happy that the ratings in the table at the top of page 18 of the document pack, page 4 of the report, particularly for compliance, are actually correct. My instinct is that good is maybe not correct. It should be moderate, because we have compliance issues that are stated in the report. So if there's time, an answer would be great. If there's not, Rachel, I'm quite happy to put those in writing for you to answer post-meeting.
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to give a quick response if that helps. So just taking the bid questions first, as that's the item we just covered within the report. In terms of the assurance opinion, as I say, within the compliance testing that we conducted in all of those key areas around demand notices, reminder letters and summonses, all of those had been conducted in accordance with the recovery schedule. So we didn't identify a particular issue around compliance in terms of those key controls. All we have noted, as I say, is that those errors in the performance data, which we were assured were human error and isolated incidents, which we have noted the reasons for those as well, where they had been copied over from a previous version. So we were satisfied that wasn't a significant failure in terms of the compliance, where the vast majority of our testing was looking at those key processes and key controls. So that's the basis for that assurance opinion. In terms of the monitoring arrangements, that would be something for management to comment, I think, as to where that goes. But I think I would just need to bear in mind, I think most of the monitoring would be through the bid arrangements. So I think that would be sure where that was effective. In terms of the overdue audit actions, this has been something that we have highlighted and worked hard with senior leadership team to try and focus on and make sure that officers are giving high priority to this. So we will continue to do that, and a member of my team does regularly attend the senior leadership team to talk through these and make sure that we have all updates on all of the actions. I am satisfied it's moving in the right direction. We do now receive updates on all of the actions, so it's not a case of we're just not getting any updates. So I'm satisfied as your head of internal audit that is moving in the right direction. But it's obviously something for you to continue to challenge officers on and make sure as a committee you're satisfied with that implementation rate. So I would encourage you to continue to.
Thank you.
Just to respond on the monitoring. So in terms of monitoring, that's undertaken by the Revenues and Benefits Manager and his team. And they would meet with the appropriate officer on the bid to have quite an operational type of discussion around what's appropriate in individual cases, because sometimes the bid might have a view on enforcement action, etc. It's acknowledged in there that occasionally there's the view that this needs to be delayed or put on hold, and we just need to be careful with that, because sometimes we have to comply with strict deadlines once a liability order is issued. So that's really what the report's getting at there. Those meetings are quite operational, quite detailed, and get into some of the weeds around some of the numbers, and we just need to make sure that custom and practice aligns with the actual agreement, and it might be that the agreement needs formally modifying either now or further down the line. So that's what the recommendation's about, and we'll follow that up as appropriate.
Okay, so this is to note, and apart from what Councillor Atherton asked for, a response from Rachel, and I think you're happy to provide that back to the committee. Is there any other comments at all? Okay, thank you, committee. So we'll note those, and then Rachel will update on those particular points as well if there's anything else there, Ian. Thank you very much. So we're going to, it is the agenda for tonight, it's agenda item 5, but it's six in your pack. So the car parking charges lessons learned review. So we have the Chief Executive, so thank you, Ed, for attending, and also Lydia, thank you for attending this. It's a very important paper. Just before I open up to officers, I think everybody knows what happened. So there was an issue with the car parking order, which meant that charges couldn't be enacted. One of the concerns, which you can argue in the benefit of the community, is that people were able to have free parking. That all said, is I think what would be useful is if members and officers focus of our duty to this council on that rather than anything else, because obviously there was a loss of revenue to the authority on there. So if we could make sure that we try and focus on that from the audit point of view. However, I think on a, as we've worked with the community, what a lot of members had been saying is, some of our residents did benefit from free parking for a few weeks, and some of the people who worked in the town benefited from car parking for those weeks as well. So there was money going in their pocket, but we're here to look at it from this authority's point of view, and the revenue there. So Ed, if I go over to you, and Lydia, if you're doing this together or whatever, just feel free, and then when you finish, I will take it back. So
thank you.
If you could hand back over.
Of course. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So I think in terms of sequencing, Chair, my intention was just to provide a brief introduction to the report as the officer who commissioned it initially, to then hand over to Rachel as the Chief Internal Auditor to just summarise the findings of the report and the investigation that she undertook. And then I will respond initially with Lydia on then the kind of management response to that. So we'll work through on that basis, and then at the conclusion of that, Chair, very happy to hand back to you and open up for questions as the committee see fit. So you've obviously summarised a bit of the context. I just wanted to quickly refresh on the rationale for what took place. Obviously, the original car parking fees, the changes were approved in November 2024. They were implemented on the 1st of April 2025, and then in May it became apparent that the required legal process to properly and fully implement those charges had not been followed. On identifying that issue, the senior leadership team took a number of immediate actions. Firstly, obviously, to understand the legal implications arising from that. Once that was clear, the focus was very much on minimising any further disadvantage to members of the community for any unlawful charging. It wasn't practical or possible to reverse the machines back to the previous still lawful charges at that point, which is where the decision was taken to implement and to move to a period of free parking during the period that the new notice and lawful notice of variation was published, prior to then the implementation of the new charges taking effect. I think it was sometime in June. We also administered a process of refunds for those who had been overcharged and wished to claim the overcharge. We obviously at the time as well were proactive in our communications, both with members and members of the public, and immediate discussions took place between myself and senior colleagues to understand what had happened and to immediately consider lessons learned and any actions need to be taken. But as Chief Executive, given the concern that was quite rightly being expressed at the time, I was very keen to make sure I had an independent assessment of what had happened, and I invited and commissioned the Chief Internal Auditor to undertake an independent assurance check and lessons learned review on my behalf to assess the position, and that was commissioned. And through that discussion and the culmination of that review and discussions with yourself, Chair, we all felt it was the right and proper thing to do for this committee to receive the report and have the opportunity to consider it, and to make sure that any actions and learning we take are considered fully and transparently by this committee. So that's a bit of a context about why we are here today. And on that note, I will hand over to Rachel then to just introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so thank you. So as is documented within the report, essentially this came down to the notice of variation process, which is stipulated within the legislation. So based on the outcomes of the review and the fact-finding exercise that was undertaken, essentially it was evident that prior to November 2024, there had been a timetable that had been developed for the implementation of any changes to car parking charges, which included that notice of variation process. Now, this had been informed by legal advice that had been received in 2024, and as I say, had included those relevant requirements. However, the circumstances that unfolded after November 2024, which I've documented within the report, resulted in essentially that advice and those plans not being fully applied in practice when the charges came into place from the 1st of April 2025. So there had been a number of complicating factors. There had been a number of changes during that period, including changes of roles and responsibilities, changes in senior management, and a number of other related projects as well, which had all contributed to a rather unique set of circumstances. So whilst I've concluded within the report that this wasn't an indication of a systemic control failure across the organisation, and there were a number of complicating factors in relation to this particular case, I have highlighted that there were a number of areas where we could actually have had some controls that may have acted almost as a safety net around that arrangement and could have helped us in picking up those issues prior to April 2025. Just looking at some of those potential areas and potential root causes that we could identify and take as lessons learned to go forward. So I've tried to set these out within 6 key areas on pages 63 and 64 of the papers this evening. Just summarising them briefly. So essentially what we wanted is to see that the documentation of the acknowledged risks and that legal advice that had been duly received in 2024 should have been there and formalised and part of any handover in terms of any changes in roles and responsibilities. So as an example, had we captured those risks within some risk registers, had it been part of a project documentation, there would have been some audit trail there that would have supported and ensured that this was picked up sooner. Also, if there had been more regular liaison between senior officers, again, this could have given an opportunity to pick this up sooner. So I don't intend to go through each of those areas further. They are documented within the report and obviously then inform the action plan within the report as well, which management have then responded to and accepted all of those recommendations. So there is a scheduled review in 6 months to ensure that although these are already mostly completed at the time of issuing the report, we want to ensure that they are suitably embedded in practice as well. So management have agreed a 6-month review in relation to the action plan as well. So I'm happy, Chair, to go into the details of any of the sections of the report further, but hopefully that provides a bit of an overview of the outcomes.
And Chair, if I may continue, thank you again to Rachel, and just to place on record my appreciation for the work that Rachel did in a very timely and thorough fashion, which was certainly helpful to me and I hope is helpful to this committee. As Rachel says, we have accepted all of the recommendations. I'll just offer a couple of reflections and I will hand over to Lydia just to speak to 1 or 2 of the details. It has been helpful in getting a diagnostic. It is certainly reassuring to me that it doesn't indicate any wider systemic issues, but what it does do is show that when you have the confluence of a number of particular circumstances, particularly around changes in personnel and instability and capacity, that it can increase risk, which is an obvious thing to say, but I think about that particularly in the context of some of our wider discussions and focuses around local government reform and some of the turbulence that creates. This is an area that we have to be really focused on and to think about and to focus on ensuring any controls we have are sufficiently resilient and robust to prevent a recurrence of this kind of thing should further instability arise in the future. So that is something that we are certainly alive to. I think particularly as we contemplate the future and move into next year and much bigger investment in time and effort of transition, that we will have to be really careful of. And I know some of us discussed that at a separate forum yesterday about something we need to be very alive to. I'm certainly very grateful to Lydia and the team who throughout this process have shown considerable accountability, considerable determination and grit to take the lessons on board, and collectively as a team we will move forward together and deliver them and support each other in making sure this doesn't happen again. Yeah, I'm really satisfied with the response I've had from colleagues to discussions we've had. So on that note, I'll hand over to Lydia just to add anything that she wishes to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you also to Rachel. Really comprehensive review, and as Rachel's mentioned, all the recommendations have been accepted and have been actioned, but I wanted to provide some confidence to members this evening that that's not just been a tick box activity. The team have been actively engaged with supporting those recommendations, but in particular the corporate property and assets team, as we have explained previously at the portfolio holder group liaison meeting as well as at scrutiny committee, we have implemented a number of improvements across that team, including establishing a programme board, so in terms of project documentation being up to date, and a proactive approach to risk management. We also have implemented, with the support of the portfolio holder, a service improvement plan, which is picking up on a number of the recommendations that you highlighted to ensure that we have a robust process in place for any future changes within the team. We have actually welcomed a new member of staff into the team in terms of capital programme management, and we also have a temporary member of staff managing the estate currently, who started yesterday. And in addition to that, we have project dashboards. We have a jobs planner, so everything is documented. We've also undertaken a skills and workload audit. We're having regular one-to-ones within the team and with the portfolio holder. And we've also had a separate diagnostic review of the service to ensure compliance with health and safety regulations and appropriate risk mitigation. And we also welcome the asset management plan audit, which has commenced. Thank you.
Well, thank you, officers. And what I will do, just out of courtesy, because Councillor Atherton did send an email before, so I will come to you first for your first points, and then I'll open it up because you did write to all the committee. And I don't want to introduce or say comments which members have said and then take your thunder away, so I don't want to do that either. I think one of the big things is certainly on one of the reviews, obviously it's the procedures checklists and the reviewing of documents, because this is a regulatory part, and I think we can all understand if you look at either RACI documents, who's responsible, accountable, who should be consulted and who should be informed, and equally as an individual, what the skills are of how that individual controls or absorbs information. Is some people are very compliance driven, and we all know that particular individual where if you haven't ticked a particular gate on a pathway, they won't let you proceed. I don't know any of the officers involved. I don't need to know. I need to know that there is support in place, and obviously the committee will have their say. I think if an individual member of staff was left on their own in such a very regulated procedure, that was unfair on that member of staff. I think that then becomes how we manage that. Equally, if you've got the wrong person with the wrong skill set in, and they don't understand compliance, because we have, some of the better ways. You get entrepreneurs in society, and entrepreneurs sort of look at things and can have different skill sets, where here you need someone who's absolutely sharp on a compliance issue, so they won't proceed any further by any stretch of the imagination. But equally, if somebody is trying to just either please or to solve a particular time and say, yes, I have done that, because I don't know, it hasn't talked about time pressures of the office on the officers concerned, though it has been come out in the commentary here. And I think just on that, for those individual officers, we need to make sure that support's in place, that training's in place, that because this was a costly decision, and this error was a costly error. My view is that's a management error for not overseeing the individual who was going through that. And the only reason I say that, and Ed will know this, is the last time parking went through, and I won't mention any officers' names, I know when it went through that process that there was all that a very controlled state how it all went through. And I remember all the consultations it went through, all the way, before it did go through. And then before I hand over to Ian, the other part of it is, and this will probably appear later in the paper, officers have said before that members should not get too operationally involved. And while I understand that, but when they're overview on a scrutiny side, either as portfolio holder or as the scrutiny chairs here or committee, equally they need the assurance that that work is being done, because it's not fair on that, either on the committee if it's a committee system, or on a particular individual if they're not being if they don't have that in place. Because I don't believe it. A councillor is going to go, have you done point 1, point 2, point 3? That's far too involved for a councillor. They need to know that that assurance has been there, that it is done. Yes, we have done that. And so I think from the councillor group, it feels as if there's been a bit let down there. And equally, obviously, on the finance side, which the Section 151 officer as well will always keep telling us from time to time, you know, where's the money coming from? But that's my little introduction. But without taking too much away, because I know you've asked some very good questions in, I'll go over to you. I know what you've said to me just before we started the meeting, so I'll let you say that, and then I'll open it up to all the others. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So members of the committee may or indeed may not have seen an email that I sent out only at 5 o'clock this evening. Not to officers, and I apologise for that, and I'll rectify that shortly. But the members of this committee have an email that has my own conclusions, having spent a couple of hours reading through the report. Not dissimilar conclusions for your own, Rachel, you'll be glad to know, albeit there are a few more. And quite a number of questions that arose from it. I don't intend to go through them all right now because we'll be here all night. So I'm quite happy to take answers post the meeting in writing. But in summary, I think it was unfortunate that a lot of issues, individual small things happened that lined up all the holes in the cheese to cause a significant impact. I have a concern that not only was there a failing in oversight, potentially from an officer's perspective, but also from the Cabinet's perspective. The plan was put to Cabinet on in November, I think it was, and not implemented until the April. But in March there was a Cabinet meeting at which there was no agenda item to review whether the plan had been completed, to get an update, whether it was ready to go. So I think it's unfair to blame, if we're going to blame just the officers. I think the Cabinet should take some responsibility, and indeed the portfolio holder who is also a member of that Cabinet, because there was at Cabinet level a failure in oversight too. It concerns me that the implication is that apart from one person who now is no longer a member of the council, nobody knew what was going on. Yet in order to present to Cabinet, there must have been a plan. Well, in fact, the report says there was a plan and there was a timeline that was all agreed. So the documentation must exist somewhere, even if it's not in a formal project plan, even if it's just a spreadsheet or a table with a list of actions and dates, it must be there. It worries me that what we needed to do had a lot of legal requirements around it. It worries me that from a legal perspective, nobody made sure that we'd actually done everything before we went and said, here it is. One thing that's not clear to me, albeit having spent 20 years in software development, I think I can guess, is why we couldn't revert to the old charges rather than have it free. And I think that needs a bit more explanation. Maybe not in this report, but in any report to do with finances, because I am aware that in the report itself, it does say that this is a review of process failings and financial impact is dealt with elsewhere. I guess finally, having the council having undergone this process more than once in the past, I am surprised that a process hadn't already been documented that could be followed, even if that process was just a checklist for somebody to say, yes, it's done, yes, it's done, yes, it's done. The fact that there were changes of reporting lines, changes at director level, that shouldn't have stopped the process working, in my opinion. It's something that we go through all our lives, things change. But the person who had the task of making sure the work was done was still there. should have said, oh, hang on a minute, what about this? That appears not to have happened. So there are lots of little things that I think have conspired to make a big impact. Last but not least, the thing that worries me most is having found the original issue and suspended car parking charges. We then redid the process only to have a second failing in the process. First one is forgivable, that's human nature. I find the second one not to be so. And I really would like to understand why it went wrong twice. Once is an accident, twice is negligent, in my opinion. As for the detail of my conclusions and my questions, I'll forward the email that I sent to members earlier on this evening round to the officers present, including yourself, Ed.
Yeah, just before I'll go to officers, I think on the point, and while I agree is this is cabinet function, I don't, because it's when you go through, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Rachel, but when you go through the regulatory steps, which are laid out, I mean, you can Google them as well, of what an authority has to do. And there are people in communities, you see it up and down. If an authority doesn't meet those steps, then they challenge them. We see it at planning and things like that as well. That all said, I wouldn't expect a councillor to be told, "Oh, I have done this, I have done that step." If a councillor says, "No, I'll let you come in. Don't worry. This is just for part of the debate." Is that what you're doing? Are you going through that regulatory step overall? Yes. I wouldn't expect them to go, 1, I've done that, councillor. 2, I've done that, councillor. 3, I've done that, councillor. If it's happening, yes. Have you done it right? Yes, I have. And that's where I'm now speaking as if I was the officer. Yes, I have done that right, councillor. And then really, I haven't. But I wouldn't expect the officers to go so detailed to the councillor to say, I have now done this, I have now done that step, I've now done that step. So I'll go to the officers, and then I'll come back to you on that particular point, and then I'll go back to Ian, and then Mike, because to be fair, that's where I'm at, is we know where the mistake was, and it's a regulatory step because something wasn't advertised in the newspaper. I don't really expect an officer to tell the councillor that's what I've done.
Okay, let me jump in then quickly before we go to Ed. I wasn't expecting officers to report on a checklist type update to Cabinet. What I do expect, though, is Cabinet, having laid the task onto the officers, is that Cabinet then seeks some kind of assurance before we say go, that we're ready to go. Have you done it?
That I agree with. What would be useful, and it isn't in the report, and I know you've said this before the meeting, that this isn't in the report, was Cabinet told, yes, it's all ready to go, or did Cabinet ask the question? That's another one. And yeah, so we'll go to Ed, and then I'll go to Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Atherton, for the questions. I'll do my best to cover off what I can. I'll invite other colleagues to come in if there's anything else that they think I've missed or would like to add. Firstly, very happy to accept this as a management responsibility. You know, this is on us. We should manage these processes. We're equipped and capable of doing so. So the error is one that we own. So very happy to accept that. There was a plan, a clear plan, and Rachel made that point up to November. Because it's a process we've done before, the officers charged with doing it knew what they were doing, and the legal advice has been provided. So I'm confident that had we continued on that trajectory with the same people doing it, we wouldn't be here this evening having this conversation. I think what has been identified through this process is the vulnerability that was created, not just in the change in senior leadership, but, and I'm going to be careful, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this, I'm not going to speak to individual officers or reflect that, but there were other changes around officer responsibilities at the time, legitimate reasons that led to further instability in the people who were overseeing this process. So it wasn't just one, it was a confluence, and to your point, Councillor, a number of changes that were necessary and rational, but ultimately led to a position where those who then started to pick this up were not equipped with the same level of knowledge or legal understanding as those who were doing it before. And that is something that ideally we would have anticipated, but in the context of the other things we were doing, it wasn't picked up at the time, and therefore it led to this failure in implementing the process. So that is why the things that are in the report are very much an attempt to design out that risk in future, so we have better controls in the future. We have process maps, we have clarity of responsibilities, explicit in job description. So the things that were identified as things that may have helped prevent this from happening have been done and implemented already. And as Rachel said, we will check them back again in 6 months to make sure they are still live. The other thing that's been done, and Lydia's spoken to this, is to beef up our governance process. We have good governance process. We have a strong project management framework, which is used in many areas of the council. And certainly Rachel and the internal audit team have attested to that previously. There was not in place for this particular piece of work. And Lydia's done some terrific work already in a short time with us to beef up the governance and grip around corporate assets and property management generally, which obviously includes car parking. So if we were doing this again in future, this would be regarded as a project. It would be reported into the project governance, and there would be that much more regular and routine governance process that exists for other things that we do. That wasn't in place for this, and therefore that check and challenge that you guys have been talking about wasn't as robust as it should have been. So, and that is why my view is that we got into this position where things slipped, and we missed some of the kind of check and challenge that exists in other areas that we would have benefited and would have picked this up had it happened sooner. And I think you know, the deed of variation, I think, rest assured, no one was more frustrated with the error that took place than us as a senior team. You know, these things are done with the best of intentions. We acted within a matter of days to regularise the position. It wasn't possible to revert the previous charges back to the ones that before, because that was the first response we would have done. Had we been able to just flick a switch and revert them back, we would have done it. But it was both the systems in place and the ability to change it, I think would take 2 weeks. I think we were advised, and at a substantial cost. And therefore, actually, given we had to display the notice for 3 weeks, there was no point in saying we put the charges back for 2 weeks and potentially break all the machines in the process. So we had to take the decision, the pragmatic decision, and one that did have our residents at the heart of it, which is we have to make sure, first and foremost, that we do not disadvantage anyone further by an unlawful charge, which is why we took that decision, and we own the responsibility as the council. So that was why we couldn't do what is the most sensible thing, and we would have done had we been able to. But the variation mission of that annex is certainly a frustration. One of the recommendations that Rachel has identified, which we accept, is to have further checks and balances, and we do check things before they go out. Typically, the unfortunate position is that that's quite a nuanced reference in our car parking order, the reference to the annex. It's one of the reasons why we will now have a document, or we now have a documented flowchart which sets out specifically the car parking areas that it refers to. So the first job of anyone looking to implement a car parking charge and to issue a notice of variation is to go to that master schedule and check that it exists. That was not in place at the time. It is why it was missed. It is a very frustrating error, and we've learned from it, and we will put things in place to prevent it from happening again. Sure.
Like to say before Rachel leaves.
Might be a different point to the one I discussed with you before the meeting, Chair, but just two things. Firstly, I mean, obviously I'm not a member of Cabinet and under no obligation to defend Cabinet, but I do think, you know, I do get invited as a chair of scrutiny to attend both Cabinet meetings and Cabinet briefings, and I can say unequivocally I knew what the correct procedure for advertising the changes in parking charges, because back in November that question was asked of officers by Cabinet, and they were taken through the procedure, including posting the notices in the newspapers. So I think Cabinet did exercise its functions correctly in actually checking what the process should be. I don't think it would be for them to come back to every single meeting subsequently and say, "Are you still following the procedure correctly?" So I just want to make that point. I think they did discharge the functions correctly. The question I wanted to ask, and yeah, I'm on. I mean, thank you for the report. It's a very thorough report. It talks about an awful lot of issues. But I have to say, I'm a bit old-fashioned, and I try and get down to the simplest level. And in fact, Ed referred to it just in his conclusion there, that now there's a schedule in place that says if we're changing car parking charges, this is what you need to do. And actually, behind all of the detail in this report, that was what was missing. A simple reference point. And then you need two things. One is you need the procedure document that says what to do, and you need within the council's operations someone who has responsibility when appropriate, and it happens across a whole range of issues, to update when changes happen. And I think, to be honest, I mean, I will have a slight aside at the legal profession. Sorry, Clive. But, you know, there's law and law. You know, there's some law that really does require legal advice to implement. But if I'm driving down the road, there's a 30-mile-an-hour sign up ahead. I know the law says I've got to slow to 30 miles an hour. I don't need to go to a lawyer to say, are there any inferences around this? And I think this was a straightforward procedural issue. So my question is, I'm afraid, because right at the bottom of all this, it's the assurance there's no systemic issue. What assurance can we have across the whole of the council's functions, where also there will be processes that need to be followed, that there are appropriate documents, whether they exist online or in paper, probably online, that cover the processes to be followed in similar circumstances. I can see that there's been a thorough going over on car parking for obvious reasons, and I don't want to get into the individuals involved and all that, etc. But I'm left saying, well, if it happened here, where else is there a gap in the documentation and the schedules of processes to be followed within the council, so we don't fall into this trap again?
With me a moment. Just before, because I did say to Rachel, so is there any other comments at the moment of anything that's been raised, Rachel? Because I know you do have to go. What I will say is I think from the committee we might want to revisit this particular paper. I know we're noting it, but I don't want the committee to raise questions and you've gone, and so if that's okay. So is there anything else, Rachel, at all from what's been raised so far?
Thank you, Chair. So just to respond, I suppose, on the last point there, just to give my feedback on that. So obviously, as part of your audit plan, we are revisiting a number of different areas, a number of different processes. So as part of our review, one of the first things we will look at is there a policy and are there documented procedures? So that's something that within the risk areas on your audit plan, I'd like to give you the assurance that we do look at whether those are suitably documented. So if there was a change in personnel, that's inherent and that's built into the processes. So that's from my perspective something to add to that, I suppose, in terms of that comment. But other than that, I don't think there was anything else I wanted to add based on the discussion so far.
Okay, if there are any points, I'll go to Clive just before, but if you want to leave, Rachel, and if there are any other points, we'll pass them on. But Clive. Thank you, Rachel.
Sure, just want to come to that point. Fully accept the first point in the report and the point that members have made. Sorry, mine's back on. And then assume that we've solved the problem, because if you don't keep that up to date, we'll just make another mistake later on. And so it's stated right at the very end, so it's page 68 of the pack, that those can be a good guide. They can point people to the things they need to consider, but they shouldn't be seen as a substitute for legal advice. And we would always say that you come to legal before implementing things, discuss your proposals, and then we can give that additional advice. And I think that's an important caveat to that approach. Yes, of course, it's good to have those in place. It will provide a framework, but there is the risk of things going out of date, and we need to safeguard against that as well.
Okay, back to you, Mike, and then
sorry, Chair. I mean, I did actually make that point in my comments. There's two parts to this. One is having those schedules and procedures across the piece, and secondly, having a robust approach to updating where necessary, whether that's through legal and legislative changes or other rules that change. And I think the suggestion, I'm struggling with the suggestion that on every single issue, an officer needs to go running off for legal advice just in case. You're going to be very busy as legal advisors if that was so. And so it is really to understand what the process for receiving, if you like, information that requires us to change procedures from externally or internally is, that then translates into change in those processes.
Just to sort of comment on that. Obviously, from a legal perspective, we would need between double the size or more if we were trying to proactively look at everything every day and advise every officer of what might change. So it's about that two-way flow, that if there will be certain matters where we know because of the decision-making process for them, we're fully aware of them, we're on board with them, we can give that advice as we go along. For other things, and it's the point going back to where else could there be a failing, for other things we won't know unless people come to us. And that, you know, we can give out proactive advice in some respects, but of course we can't predict what absolutely everybody's doing. So that's why the caveat on there of all, you know, having that ability to check. And I understand your point that not everybody needs to become a run to legal absolutely every minute of every day, but where there is anything which is a change from, if you like to call it business as usual, that's the sort of trigger we'd expect to have people coming to us to seek advice.
But sorry, Ian. I'll go to Councillor Mason and Orson, but just before that, Jim, Ed just wanted to come in. So then
just to if I can respond to just a couple of the points that have been made, just to add something to it. So I think the point that Rachel makes is we obviously have internal assurance and a work plan that should be risk-based, is inputted by ourselves as senior leadership team to say where we think we want to gain assurance. Obviously, the Section 1.1 officer takes a very proactive view on that as well, and that's something we own and discuss and debate as a team, and ultimately this committee will have its own view and will sign it off. So that is about making sure we are looking in the right places, hopefully to mitigate the points you've said as well. The other thing I would say is, obviously the work plan doesn't cover everywhere, and we can't always look everywhere. So what we also try to facilitate, and one of the things we sought to demonstrate through this process, is a culture of openness and transparency, because one of the biggest risks for any leader is not knowing or people being scared to tell you. So one of the things I'm always encouraging people, and we try and create as a senior team, is the ability for people to come and say, I've got a problem, I need help, this has gone wrong, rather than worrying about the repercussions and consequences of that, because that is the biggest risk, and things will definitely fall out of kilter with what they should do if that's the right kind of approach you have. So that is an important part of governance. And the other part of governance, I would say as well, is what we've also described and is in place now, is the meeting and governance structures which create the safety valve and the check and challenge, and hopefully the checkpoint that will make sure that things don't fall through the cracks. So hopefully just a bit of assurance around the kind of mechanisms we use to try and avoid that kind of risk. But it is a constantly dynamic process, and we keep needing to assess it. The other thing I would say as well is, obviously we have regulatory environments, particularly for housing now as well. And so the inspection that was undertaken independently last year is another method of assurance that we can all take around, for example, what the housing service is doing to meet its obligations in terms of policy, procedures and compliance. Thank you, Chair.
I shall be brief. Yeah, I had a number of questions to ask tonight, but obviously I wanted to ask them with Rachel in the room. So, but I do share some of the issues that Councillor Atherton has brought up in relation to Councillor Brown. That I do share his view, and particularly in relation to the word systemic. And I shall put my views in writing. I think it's only fair that I do that, just to save everyone the time, because I think we've explored that. But I do share the view of Councillor Brown.
Just before I go to Councillor Orson, if anyone wants to say questions and while Rachel isn't here, please feel free to say them, because obviously it's a public meeting. What I think we may end up doing, as I said earlier, is because obviously Rachel had to go, this is an important paper. It's, you know, financially it's important, equally for reasons members have said so far. We're only noting this, and I think we may want to come back to it, because I'm getting the feeling from some members we've still got some questions and we don't think we've necessarily got all the answers here. And it's not for us just to be told, oh, this is what we've done and we just nod it through either. But that's a view. If the committee doesn't agree with that view, we don't have to. Councillor Orson.
You'll have to forgive me because I'm, just a simple farmer. If this is a process and it's regulatory, and as Councillor Higgins has said already, it's been done before, which involved jumping through hoops, ticking boxes. That sounds to me like a checklist. How have we sort of made such an error?
I'm not sure I can add too much more to what has already been said. Obviously, the issue was there wasn't previously a checklist in place, and there was a clear plan for the officers who owned the responsibility up to November, and that had been properly supported by legal advice. Due to the change in the officer responsibilities at the time on a number of fronts, not just an individual, there clearly was not a handover that effectively transferred the understanding and obligations that went from one officer to another, which then led to an ineffective implementation of this process. So, that is it in a nutshell, I think, as to why this happened. What we have tried to do subsequently then through the work that Lydia has done is to ensure that we have stronger checks and balances on matters like that. So that there is a checklist, accepting the point that Clive's made around that needs to be caveated and not just followed slavishly without an understanding of the reasons for it. But that is why it happened. I don't know if any colleagues have anything they wish to add to that, but hopefully that responds to the question.
Clive has already stated that a written process is not a positive thing because the law can change the following day. But surely there's already a process that's been, written from powers above, powers above Melton Borough Council, in terms of, it's a process, it's regulatory. I don't understand how we can make such an error. And then if there seems to have been a problem at handover, who was responsible for the change in job descriptions? Because that's a lot of this is being blamed on the change in job descriptions. So who was responsible for that? And the other thing as well is, going back to what Ian said, why did the person who was responsible, why did they not put their hand up and say, look, I've made a mistake? Is there a bit of a bad working culture at Melton Borough Council? People can't admit to a mistake.
I don't think that is reflective of the situation whatsoever. As I've said before, it's not appropriate for me to comment on matters related to individual officers. It's not appropriate for this forum. There was a decision taken, I think is referenced in the report, from the interim director at the time in relation to responsibilities that was necessary, and she took the view that was necessary. That was the decision that was taken. That led to a change in roles. We then had the change in personnel of the director from the interim to the new director. So there was a turbulence, and that happens sometimes in organisations. And we rely clearly in that process on a clear handover of all responsibilities. Now, there was a comprehensive handover undertaken, but it did clearly not capture every nuance of this responsibility, and that led to the gap that then led to ultimately the ineffective implementation. So I don't believe it's reflective of culture. I think you've heard from the internal auditor, the chief internal auditor, about having interviewed everyone who was part of this process. There was no one pointing fingers at anyone else. There was no one lacking accountability, both of which would be indications that there was a cultural blame culture, which I do not believe to be the case. And I do not believe there is evidence to support that. I think this is an unfortunate set of circumstances which did not have, at the time, sufficient controls around the process, which led to this unfortunate circumstance, and one that, as we say, we accept the responsibility for. But I don't believe it's endemic of a wider fundamental issue, because I don't believe the insurance framework that we have at this council bears that out, given the other internal audits that are done throughout the year and that test numerous functions of this council and show broadly satisfactory, if not good, assurance. So there's always work to be done. My concern, as I outlined at the beginning, is that often we are working across a very broad agenda, across many responsibilities, and our capacity is stretched, and we try and manage that to the best of our abilities. And I stand with officers in trying to manage often what are very complex things and multiple faceted demands on their time in the best possible way. And that is getting more difficult as a consequence of the context within which we find ourselves. And that may require us as officers and senior managers to have honest conversations with members about the extent to which we can manage the broader priorities and aspirations of this council, because clearly it's absolutely crucial to me that whatever we do well and we do it right. And if we aren't capable of doing that, or we have errors creeping in, then we need to take stock on what's on our to-do list and perhaps rationalise that to make sure that the things we are doing are done right, and we could put additional controls in place for those. So that will be an ongoing dialogue for us and this council, I suspect, as we go forward.
I'm just going to bring Clive in, just on that as well, and then Tim is going to come in. Where I think, again, this is a personal view. I don't necessarily think this is a director level responsibility to do the car parking order. That's the director's far more senior than that. That all said, is I think obviously when I said the RACI, responsible, accountable, consulted and informed. Obviously, a director definitely needs to be a part of that, and needs that. Again, like I said, the council is not going to be told this was done, that was done, and probably the director just needs to know that's what you're to do, and I expect that to be done within that regulatory environment. Just again, I think like Councillor Orson was saying, just keep it very simple. If you're fitting doors, you fit 100 doors, you might fit one or two a little bit wonky. That's just how things are. If you're testing a gas boiler, you've got to get that absolutely right every time. And I think with the car parking order, you've got to, because it's all set out, you have to get the whole thing right. Any failure, the whole lot fails. Where if we put in a door in a council property and you probably have 5 doors to put in, you put one wonky one in, the tenant calls the call centre and says, well, 4 doors are fine, but one's wonky. Well, the person goes back and refits that door, and sometimes that's just human life. But on this, and it's a huge costly process if it goes wrong, and it's got to be right. But I'll bring Clive, and when Clive finishes, Tim, if you want to go with your question. Thank you.
It was only one very simple point. Just wanted to clarify for Councillor Orson. I wasn't saying a checklist isn't a good thing. What I'm saying is, on its own, it may not serve the purpose, and that's why I'm saying that having those checks so people can look at the checklist, but then coming back to legal for confirmation that nothing's changed, and for checks on anything else they need to do to deal with the issue in hand.
Thank you, Chair. There's one question I want to just reiterate and just get a proper answer for, was what rationale informed decision to suspend all charges during the 3-week period notice? Was this illegal, legally required or discretionary? I know we've gone back and you couldn't change the machine, which I thought is highly, well, you're the experts, but I thought it'd be quite a simple thing to do, but obviously it's not. But if I ran a car park and that was my business, I'll be standing at the entrance to the car park taking manual tickets. The car park attendant, the olden days with a card machine. I know council used to do it because when I was the manager at the Melton market, councillors, council car park attendants were evident there in their car parks. You can't afford to lose money like that. I just thought you could do something else rather than take the hit.
Ed?
I think Lydia's going to pick up responding to the machine. I don't know whether Clive wants to pick up on the legal side of things. Chair.
So that was my thought exactly. We did contact the company that facilitate the changes. Obviously, they were party to the initial change on the 1st of April. The machines are at the end of their life. We do have a schedule for replacing them, which is part of our project management at the moment, or the schedule for the replacement this financial year. However, we were advised, as Ed mentioned previously, that we weren't able to make that change immediately, and that it would take, I'll have to double check, but a period of 10 to 14 days. And there was no guarantee that they would actually then facilitate the change, and it could have led to significant breakdown across the machines. And that was the rationale for why we didn't just revert the cost back, but we did spend a lot of time contacting them and trying to take that approach forward. And the machine, I can confirm that the machines are going to be replaced this year, but are following obviously a project management process to enable that.
Just on that, sorry, Clive, just on that point with machines, I know Councillor Lumley's always talked about ticket machines and then tap and pay and things like that. That process, and like you say, you wouldn't have to change the physical mechanics of the change machine if you did have a tap and go charging machine. And now I know some people like paying with coins and that as well, but society is very much going away from that cash, and obviously that's a whole different debate. We don't need to have that here. But if we had a tap and go system, again, but going back to the points that have been raised earlier, would that have been some way of collecting some kind of money, do you think? Because if the answer is yes, then obviously when we replace the machines, we need a tap and go system. And I know we can do the pay as you go app and all the other stuff, but basically where you just literally got your contactless card, bang.
So it would still require a change to the machine, even the online payment, tap and go. The only alternative to not change the machines was to just rely on the app payments. But that would have also facilitated obviously a lot of change to the signage that was there. And the signage obviously was the new charging period from the 1st of April.
So no, so I get the point. So it still would have meant a lot of effort just to do that. We're not going to quantify that tonight, but it still would be, there's a lot more stuff than changing the charging regime.
Can I just clarify, it wasn't the fact that it was a lot of effort. We were told that it was not possible to change and that it would have led to further breakdown of machines that were classed as end of life.
So that's on the current machines. On the new machines, are they more user friendly to if something had to change? And for example, even if we said as a council, we're going to have half price parking for the day or something like that, could something like that with these new machines we're going to do, is there something where technology is supporting that better? And obviously I know there would be a change, but obviously with the physical coins, I know that results in a whole physical change on the machine itself. If you're doing something where it's a tap and go system, it's probably more of a software update.
So the new machines, it's not been decided which new machines that we're going for yet. That's being reviewed currently, and all those different factors are being taken into account: ease of use, the ability to change. So that will be factored into any new machines that are installed in Melton.
Okay, thank you. That's a good answer. Thank you.
Just on Councillor Webster's other point, from a legal perspective, because we didn't follow the process, we couldn't charge the new sum. So that was unlawful. That's why we had to do something different. So it's the practicalities that stopped us just going back to the old sum, because if we had had machines that we could do it instantly, we'd have just reverted to the previous charges. That would have continued to be lawful because we hadn't done anything to change it, and we could have done. It's the technological issue which was the thing that stopped us, but we were in a position where we couldn't charge the higher amount and we couldn't enforce penalty charges or anything like that for the higher amount. So that's why, taken together, those two factors, we had to go with no charge instead.
Thanks, Clive. The question asked was, could you have a car park attendant there taking money and card payments instantly for the old charges? Physically at the gate, like the old used to do, event, you know, olden days.
I'd say the first, when you were first speaking, you said about whether it was a legal issue, so that's why I commented on that side. From a legal perspective, you could have had people collecting, but I think it's not for me to sort of comment on the resourcing aspects of that, where, you know, as long you could charge because you've got an order in place. The means of collecting that would have been okay if you had somebody there who was going to issue, you know, give a physical ticket out. But say the implications of how that would have worked in practice is a, you know, completely different issue.
I know, obviously, lost all that money and not collecting any money at all. But if we collected some money in that way, the deficit wouldn't have been quite so bad, would it? That's what I'm saying. That's how I would do it in my car park. Can't afford to lose that money. I would be standing there collecting money, parking in my car park. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think some of the points from like the committee, they probably could go in where an update back to committee. So I think like Tim's raised a point. It's a point that obviously officers can talk about, and I think, like as Lydia said, is how we're looking at how the new machines work, and they are, you know, this mistake is feeding into how the new machines that you're likely to purchase again, and so in many ways you're informed from it from this particular issue. I'll come to you in one moment, Ian, but just going to ask if there's any committee members who haven't said anything, want to say anything. And the other thing I'm going to ask the committee before I close it, because I know we can talk about this all night. I always say car parks, you could, and car park charges, you can talk about it the whole year if you wanted to. It's very now, is there anything in the paper or the action plan or the lessons learned where any committee members, other than anything that's been written in, is there anything where any committee member thinks is being missed that the officers need to consider and come back on? And if not from there, you can always put it in writing, because I think we'll ask for that to come back. And is there any committee members who've not spoken want to speak? No. Ian, I'll have the closing comments from yourself, and then I'll move the notes. Did you want to say something, Lydia, as well?
Just briefly on Councillor Orson's point. So in terms of the openness and willingness of the team to engage in this process, and we take responsibility that a mistake was made, but there was nobody that was trying to hide or hide any information from that, and they were actively involved. And picking up on Ed's point, there was a real spirit of openness and transparency and a willingness to, this doesn't happen again, with all the following the recommendations, but going above and beyond that to ensure that we are mitigating any risks and following due process. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd just like to come back on 2 points. Ed, relating to a point you raised earlier on, it's not my intention, and I hope not the intention of anybody sat around this table, to lay blame on any single person. That's not the job of this committee. And I apologise if anything I've asked, anything I've said, anything I've written leads you to that conclusion. We are, or should be, all about process. That leads me on to a concern that Clive's got about the written process. I've spent the last, I don't know how many years, working inside processes written by the Ministry of Defence, some of which I was instrumental in writing. I've worked inside ISO 27000. I've worked inside ISO 9000. Each and every one of the Bibles says that a process is there as guidance. It doesn't have to detail each and every step. So in this particular instance, the process would say, speak to legal to make sure that what you're doing conforms to the law as it currently stands. It need not be a process as such. It could be a work instruction. I do think, and it's a point I raised 2 years ago in my initial training, one of the failings of this council and many other councils is that we don't aspire to ISO 9000 from a quality position, quality process. You don't have to be certified, but you should, in my opinion, work towards compliance with. ISO 9000 doesn't guarantee quality product. A lot of people have that mistaken belief that the quality process delivers quality product. It doesn't. It just means that you have processes that are auditable, that are repeatable. But at each and every stage, ISO 9000, ISO 27000 and other ISO standards always allow you to deviate from the process you've written down or to not follow it, as long as you justify why you're doing it. And I do think that a proper quality manual may have helped mitigate this. It's too late for Melton Borough Council now to do a quality manual, but I do think it's something that the next iteration of our government at local level should aspire to, is ISO 9000 from a quality management perspective and ISO 27000 from an IT security perspective, because that's another concern I have, but not for today. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, just before I'll wrap up, and then we'll move that. We note it, but I think the committee would like this just to come back again, and probably a little bit from what Lydia was saying is, if you're looking at purchasing new machines, probably just as a sense check, just to come back to this committee again, and we can probably sense check to make sure, like you were saying on there. But I think some of the points as well, Ian's written some, he's going to forward those to officers, and I think if we can write back to the committee. Yeah, go on then.
I just want to agree with what Ian said. I don't want any comments that I've said to be seen as looking for a name to blame. It's far from it. You know, I thank you very much as well, Councillor Higgins, for bringing this back to committee, because I think it does need further discussion, especially with Rachel present in the room. So I look forward to speaking about it in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, so if we look for either 3 to 6 months to come back to committee, equally, I think the answers to Ian's points, and if any of the committee members want to write something further, yeah, I'll come to Ed, and then go on, Ed. In fact, what I'll do is I'll finish and then I'll give you the closing line, because to be fair, Ed, you have said that you guys have, you know, you've taken this on board, and so I'll let you have the last word on it. And I think also is, while it isn't a function of this audit committee, the public has, and some of our residents, and like I said in the opening part, they have their little benefit of not paying for car parking has been the council's loss, but equally having some money in their pockets as well. But that isn't a function of what this committee is about or what it's trying to learn on. Equally, I think some of the views that some of the public have said is what they did find is when car parking was free, it was very difficult to move around the town. And, you know, there's plenty, and what I will say, and if anyone is watching this, there's plenty of free park. If money is difficult for you, and you know, money is very difficult for many people at the moment, there are free parking places in and around the town. I'm not going to list them here because some of the, you know, but if you are struggling, there are some free car parking places in and around the town. You know, we want to attract footfall as well, but that isn't the function of this paper or this committee on this particular item as well. But I thought I would just say that because I know it's been a huge interest for the public as well, and car parking and the charges of car parking is always very topical. But Ed, I'll let you conclude, and then I think we've noted the paper.
Thank you very much, Chair. And just to respond to a couple of the latter points there, and just to give assurance back that I've certainly not taken anything that's been said by this committee as not constructive. and not thoughtful and not legitimate. So I'm grateful for the comments and questions which have been perfectly reasonable. Any reference I've made to being careful about naming officers is just to explain why I'm couching some of my remarks at times so I don't expose an individual officer, not that your questions were inappropriate. So please be assured around that. Very happy to review with my team any further comments that come from colleagues. I think Councillor Mason indicated as well he was going to submit some further reflections. So, and Chair, happy to work with you in relation to reviewing those comments and thinking what the most helpful response back to the committee would be. As Rachel mentioned, we've already made a commitment as a senior team to review progress within 6 months in any case. So I think that fits quite nicely with this committee. Want to have a further update. So yeah, just to give that assurance, Chair, happy to have that further discussion with yourself once those comments are received. Thank you.
The last one.
The point I was making, Chair, that obviously what you've got before you at the moment is one report. You've discussed things related to that report and it's gone slightly wider. If you want it to come back, I think it's important to say, yeah, a motion and say what it is that you want to come back. Now, I accept what I'd said, that there might be some discussion around fine detail, but if we don't know what's coming back and when it's coming back, it's hard to plan for that fully. Now, yeah, we could potentially take the view and just say, well, look, outside of this, we'll get another item on the agenda. But since it follows from this report, it makes more sense to link it together. If you want something additional, obviously it's got to be something within the terms of reference of this committee. So that's got to be clear that we can't just go endlessly into other territory. So I don't know if you've got thoughts on just the basis on which you want it to come back.
Well, I think Ian's put some, yeah, that is a very good point. So Ian's put some questions in place, and there were some questions that were raised in this meeting. Obviously, Rachel couldn't be there, and I know Councillor Mason wanted to probably raise a question. I don't want just an endless date of where committee members send questions and questions and questions in. So if there are any questions in the next 48 hours, or is that?
Ultimately, the committee is in the committee's power to either note the report, which effectively is the end of this item, or to say, well, we note the report, but we would like to have further information on X, Y, and Z, whatever that may be. And obviously, that's for the committee to decide what it is it wants in addition. So if it relates directly to this report, obviously Rachel will need to be engaged in that. We'll need to work with her to, to raise whatever, to address whatever those points are. So it's a matter of just explaining what you want to see from us, not necessarily into minute detail, but broadly what you want officers to bring back.
Well, I think from what I've seen and heard from the committee members, so one, I think on the new machines, and we were talking about what the lessons learned of this means in the new procurement of the new machines. So what are we looking for because of these particular areas? The other thing I think, now, while I don't think this committee wants to look at the minutiae, but if we ran the process again, because it's to be fair, it's unlikely that this council, I don't want to constrain the council at all, but it's unlikely that the car parking charges will be raised for some considerable time in the future. But whether a mock process of, if I was the member of staff, and for example, Clive, you was my manager, and I did a mock part of increasing car parking charges, and your oversight, does it meet the requirements? And so basically, it's like a sense check, and it keeps people updated. I mean, we've discussed this when, for example, we've talked about training and various other things. So has that kind of action taken place? And I think something like that back to this committee as a bit of a assurance around these lessons learned, so it's actually has been engaged, because I'm very aware that it might be unlikely car parking is raised for 3 to 4 years. It might be raised next year. I'm not going to, preempt that, but it is looking at historically that this council raises its car parking every 4 years. The last one was 5. So it might not happen. And like you say, whole personnel changes again within that period of time.
Chair, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to find which of your terms of reference that fits in, because the report itself is fine. But when we're going beyond that, just for example, there's not much in that report regarding new machines. And ordinarily, if we were looking at a process and saying, "Are we doing the right thing? We get machines," we go to scrutiny, for example, if we decided it needs to go to members. So I'm not trying to be difficult. It's just finding what's within the remit of this committee connected to this report. And if you, for example, wanted further background on some of the issues from this report, that's fine, because there's clear terms of reference here that relate directly to that. So you'd have to sort of centre it on the principal purpose of this committee rather than a sort of parking general, if you want to call it that.
One of the questions the committee has asked is obviously why didn't we go back to the old car parking charges and move it? And one of the reasons why was because the current machines, it was very difficult. So the new machines probably would allow that process to be more simple. That was my thought on that. But Simon, I know you wanted to say something, but if there is anything, Clive, because I think the committee doesn't want to reject the report, they want it to come back.
If we note the report, that brings an end to it. Therefore, I propose that we don't note the report and we bring this back for further discussion. We already have Councillor Atherton with further questions. We have Councillor Mason with further questions. We have Councillor Webster with further questions. I have further questions, and yet we can't actually ask them because Rachel's unfortunately had to go to another meeting. Therefore, I don't think we can note the report.
If you want to adjourn it on that basis to have it come back, then yeah, you can do that. Obviously, any guidance you can give around the issues, rather than Rachel come back, and there would be things, issues here. I'm sure she could answer a number of those questions. What we don't want to do is bring her along, and then her say, "Well, now I need more time." So having members submit questions would be helpful. That doesn't mean they can't ask further questions on the night, but having an idea of that, because otherwise we're just in that risk of going, same again, and not actually reaching any conclusion.
So if I say that members send to either the chair and vice chair questions that they have, and we'll adjourn this item for going back to what the chief executive said about 3 to 6 months. Would that work?
So if I can say, so the motion would be, and obviously again about those formalities, but someone have to move it, someone have to second it, and then vote on it. So to adjourn consideration of the report to the, is it better to go for a particular date? If we look at say the January meeting, I'm thinking, because that way we've got, rather than just sort of say a loose time scale.
Let's say January.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming, Chair, that this report at some point will need to go in front of council, will it, or does it stop here?
It's an audit report. Yeah. That's an audit is the committee that deals with these.
Right. Okay. So so there's no driver to have it kind of to reconvene before the next full council, as for instance. It stays within this forum, albeit the report is available to everybody.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may, I suppose my question would be, if it's being adjourned, is there any reason why it wouldn't come back to the next meeting? If the issue at hand is that the officer who members would like to hear from in relation to some of their questions isn't present this evening, I suppose my question would be, is that not a way to expedite the opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy for it to come back to the next meeting. I thought with January, you were saying that other updates were going to happen, so it tied in. But
I think, I suppose, just again to be clear, so I think we have said we will review it as management team within 6 months to make sure that we've got our own assurance that the things that have been implemented as a consequence of this are stable and solid and are still in place and haven't slipped by the wayside. Obviously, one of the roles of this committee is to monitor that audit recommendations that we agree to are then implemented, and obviously that's something so there is an update that could be provided possibly as part of the next update that gives an update on the actions that we've agreed to, many of which are already completed, as already been noted. So that would only be a limited change to what you've got before you tonight. But I'm just thinking in terms of the issue is less about I think, if I understand the committee correctly, less about kind of going beyond the scope of the original report and more about wanting to be able to ask questions of the officer, the chief internal auditor, and the author of the lessons learned report, who isn't now present at this meeting, and therefore members aren't able to satisfy themselves with the answers they require, and therefore, maybe the simplest way is to just bring it back to the next meeting. But I just make that suggestion as a practical one.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And the next point I'm going to make applies equally whether we come back in January. It's just that because Rachel isn't here, we're presuming she's normally available for the meeting. Just hopefully she is, whichever one we go for. So, I mean, I think hopefully we'd be realistic that if for some reason Rachel's got a holiday and won't be here, which would be unusual, we just go to the next meeting. And then, do you want to say something about members submitting any matters on which they seek clarification to Democratic Services within, well, we say 14 days, something like that, and just give a reasonable time period?
Happy with that. I think most, yeah. Well, I'm happy with the end of the week, to be honest, because questions should be ready for today's meeting. But if we say 7 days from today, which would be it'd be the 7th of October. Any questions to Democratic Services? If you wish to copy myself in as chair and Clive, that would be welcome as well. And Ian, I know you were going to forward your questions as well. So yeah. Thank you. So if I've moved that, Clive. We have a seconder. Councillor Orson, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you, members. Okay, right, risk management update. And this one is to note do we have Martin here, or is it yourself, Dawn? Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So members had their risk management training before the session. There was a good attendance there, and that was timed deliberately to coincide with this regular 6-monthly report, which goes both to Cabinet and this committee. When it goes to Cabinet, it also goes alongside the performance reporting. So you've got the strategic risk register attached as an appendix. And that also includes the various risk consequences of those risks and also mitigating actions for each item register. Since the last 6-monthly report, there's been one new risk added into the strategic risk register, and that relates to private sector housing. And that's moved up from the operational risk register. And that's in recognition of the requirements of the Renters Reform Bill and the implications of that. One risk has been downgraded and will now be moved to the operational risk register, and that relates to the stability of IT system following a number of improvements to the IT infrastructure over the last few years. Since the last report, you will have heard during the training that we've continued to embed the new risk management process following the move to the new IT system, and that's moved from the previous spreadsheet-based system. As I said, that's seen reporting integrated to Cabinet with performance, and we'll carry on refining that in light of any feedback that we get from members or officers accordingly. We've also implementing a range of training and support provided as part of the Council's insurance contract, and the training this evening was the first of those. So happy to answer any questions, Chair.
On that paper, thank you very much. Yeah, just one question. I've been through the risk report, and it's at PL2, the implementation of food waste collection arrangement. I hate to say it, but it seems to be a bit of a hot potato, this. Don't all laugh at once. It seems to me that little has changed and little has moved on since March report. This concerns me greatly, the council's well-being as well as everybody else's. Some questions. The report seems to suggest that it accepts not going to meet the statutory deadline, which in itself gives me a pause of thought. So the question, one of the questions is, are there any penalties that we will suffer for not meeting the statutory deadline? Because it seems to me that currently we have an anticipated date for December 2026. Does that make sense? That's what seems to be on the report. And also, we were to get some more resource in the shape of project officer. I just wonder whether that project officer has been employed. So just answer those questions. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember the title of the grant, but we've had the grant for the implementation grant. So we have received notification of that from the government, and that's been allocated, and that includes the funding for the project officer. That project officer has been appointed to. I'm fairly sure they've actually started, but we've certainly appointed recently. What we don't know is the amount of new burdens funding for actually providing the service, and that's the issue with meeting the deadline, that until we know how much funding we have got, we do not know if an implementation fully throughout the borough in line with the requirements is affordable. So we are taking the view that we're being really cautious with what's negotiated and agreed with our buyer. The other issue as well is around the capital cost. That has been reported to council, and it was reported at budget time, that in order to purchase the number of vehicles that is needed to provide, again, a full service, the grant is adequate, the capital grant. We've made representations to government, no further grants been put in. And until we know the range and scope of the actual service that we're implementing, we don't want to over with those vehicles. There's also been difficulties with procurement as well, not least because the market is being swamped, as you can imagine, with orders from. So there's been a number of issues, but I can say this is being managed as a project with regular updates to cabinet, regular updates to scrutiny. Previously a discussion there, and a lot of discussion at management team on the issue.
Just to follow up, Dawn, are there any penalties that we would suffer? Do you know of any penalties? It may not.
Not aware of any at the current time. I also understand as well that it's a significant risk for a number of other councils as well in terms of meeting the deadline. So we're not the only one. I think the view is that because of the difficulties that all councils are having with securing vehicles, contracts, and the lack of clarity over the funding, which has now been deferred to the government announced that we would not know the funding until the settlement, and that has now been pushed back until just before Christmas. That is wholly inadequate with implementing a service as intended by that date. So I think we'll see a lot of councils in our position.
And just to finalise that, Dawn, would it be appropriate to have an interim report at the next meeting on this? Because it seems to be, it's right at the top of the agenda. It's the second biggest risk to the council. I just wonder whether or not it would help if we understood the position, or would it help you? But it is, it is something we need to know. I believe it standards.
I think I'll take advice on this as to whether that's an audit and standards issue. I mean, it's been to scrutiny, so whether it's more appropriately a scrutiny or cabinet issue, because whilst I know you're concerned about the risk register, whether that's appropriate to get a report back here on process of implementation, I think, remains to be seen. It's also in the audit plan as well, around looking at the project related to this as well. So some work will be undertaken on
that. If it's going to scrutiny or go to cabinet, then I'm content, as long as it goes somewhere for it to be monitored. Thank you.
So thank you, Dawn. Again, I think this is a good report, but I do have one concern, and it relates to IT security. There is the security breach risk SG5, but it doesn't talk about the very late implementation of 2FA. I did see when I was getting my machine upgraded to Windows 11 the other day that 2FA tokens, YubiKeys specifically, are being issued to officers. I don't know what the plan is for members to implement 2FA. There is 2FA enabled already for a point that we change passwords, but there's no requirement for us to change passwords. And indeed, government recommendations these days are that as long as you've got a complex password, the less you change it, the better. There's also no mention of checking that passwords have been breached. And this is where I should perhaps declare a professional interest, because the company I've recently retired from has a password breach database that is one of the largest in the world. And they can check passwords have not been breached dynamically. And put mechanisms in place to make sure that you don't just add a 1 or a 2 or a 3 to the end of your password should you change it. So personally, I'd like to see a risk, unless it's in the operational risk area and not the strategic risk area, around 2FA and everything that's wrong with passwords.
I've not got the appropriate page in front of me, but I can check and make sure that we beef up what the existing controls are. And if there is some weakness in that, then add that into future action. With regard to multi-factor authentication, if members use a council-owned laptop, then they are being asked to register for multi-factor authentication, and also the tool that makes sure they have a strong, strengthable password. And I can assure you, you can't just add a 2 on the end when you change your password. So it's to do with whether members use a council-issued laptop or whether they're not using a council-issued laptop.
I did register this when the notification came out about a year ago. 2FA only kicks in when you change your password. And there's no requirement within the system to force you to change your password periodically.
I can take that back to IT so that we can pick up. Yeah. Okay.
Just quickly, I hope PR4, which is private sector housing, and the new responsibility of the Renters' Rights Bill. In the narrative on this one, it refers to an improvement plan, including the additional resource going to SLT at the end of July. I just wanted to see any update as to whether that's been progressed.
I might have to get the officer concerned to come back to you on that one, unless, sorry. So
it just says, it's needed to, I was hoping we'd learn that a decision had been taken and something that, if you get the officer to respond, please.
Yeah, will do.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, members. Anybody else? This is to note as well, so we'll confirm that. Item 7, Code of Conduct Complaints Update. Clive, and just to let everybody know, I do have some urgent business as well with Clive, which we will talk about, so don't shoot off when we finish this paper. Hopefully that won't take too long. Clive, over to you.
This is just following on from a report that came in, I think, March of this year, which is the annual standards update. In transcribing over some of the details, one member of the committee pointed out that there was an error. It was just that the carry forwards from previous years, one column was inaccurate. All I've done today is a report which puts in the correct numbers in those tables, and which basically reflects the outcomes of several complaints, and this is going back to the 2022-23 year, which they were the ones that was missing. So it's historical data that was requested. So it's there. In simple terms, there was 3 complaints, and there was no breach of the code for any. So that's all it is. Unless members have got any questions on the detail.
Okay. this was to note as well, wasn't it? Yes, and to note. So we do have some urgent business. I'll just have a quick chat with Clive and then we'll go into them. Okay, so so two items of urgent business. One is from myself and one is from Clive. So I'll go first, and then Clive will talk about the second item of urgent business. So one thing that I'm looking to do is in relation to the Section 106. Audit Committee looked at Section 106 and how it worked out. Rachel did a comprehensive plan to that. The committee at the time, and while it's slightly changed its composition from then, we had asked that a member was given more regular updates on the Section 106, and the officers, I'm not saying this is particularly right or wrong, the officers were saying it's a detailed report and it wasn't appropriate for a lead member to be on those particular forums. And I think equally on that is while anything that we take away when we're doing audit plans, it has to come off one of the other audit areas. So we don't want to necessarily take all the attention away from one just for another, just in case it's either a one-off or anything else. But I have spoken to Clive and we will consider that, and Clive has said that in our chair and vice chair meeting we can look at that, but it will mean that something else is not audited by Rachel if it needs to cost some time. But I think obviously the importance of Section 106, and that this committee did say that we felt that members should be more involved in it, while the officers, and I totally understand why the officers said it is detailed, it's not strategic, it's very operational. Equally, I think we just need to make sure that everything T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. So it's obviously come up again. So audit will do that. But I will reiterate publicly that this committee did say it felt that a member or lead member should be more hand in glove with the officers at the time, which was in that meeting, which is recorded, it was slightly resisted, assuming we can do it again. So that's my urgent business and Clive's urgent business, and then we can close the meeting.
Strictly, Chair, it has to be your urgent business because you're the one who says whether it's urgent or not. But obviously, I'm happy to raise it. This is a matter relating back to the last meeting regarding the AGS wording, and I think members remember there was quite lengthy debate regarding one of the references in that, and that related to member relations. And it was a valid point raised by members that there has been an issue, but it's not involved everybody, and there was a possibility that the wording suggested would misrepresent the position and therefore potentially cause further issues itself, because it was suggesting a state of affairs that didn't exist. I do apologise because you haven't got the wording circulated to you, but following discussion with officers internally and also the external auditors did pick this up, and we had a discussion about it last week. It's been suggested that the wording is amended to read a deterioration in relationships between some elected members in 2024-25 and resulting distraction and focus for senior officers, which has affected capacity, and therefore this remains in action for 2025. That's what we're considering, because it's more qualified. It's not, obviously we don't want to identify members or suggest anybody in particular has been behaving inappropriately, but that's a little narrower than the broader wording before, which suggested potentially suggested a broader breakdown in communications. So I'm happy to circulate that wording to members. We can update that. I don't know if members want to discuss that further at this point.
Right, I do recall that discussion. Just to be clear, is this is going to go to the full?
The AGS is ultimately signed off by this committee. So the process for us at the moment, we've published our draft annual governance statement. That is then considered, that has to be published in alignment with our statement of accounts. The external auditors look at that, they look at the narrative statement, they look at it broadly across all their areas. And then following their review, they come back with additional comments. They may have views on things in there, they may want clarification. And ultimately that's signed off as a final version by this committee. That in terms of approval, it's a little bit strange situation because the guidance under which that's completed says that it has to be signed by Ed and the leader, even though it can't be this committee. So that ends the governance process, and it doesn't actually have to go to full council. But once it's adopted by this committee, it is a final document.
Personally, I do recall the discussion. I'd like to see in writing what's just been read out, and so I can refer it back to the document. So commenting. So could we ask that that is done, and then it comes back to the next final sign-off? I'd like to propose that formally.
Certainly, and as I say, ultimately the sign-off of the AGS has to wait till it's gone through the external auditors. So obviously we won't be able to sign off a final version until that time anyway. But yeah, I mean, this can be circulated so members have it in advance of that for when it does come back.
Well, thank you, members, and thank you for your patience as well on the car parking paper. I thought that was very good. So make it 8:23. I call the meeting closed.